Good evening, and welcome to the Way Out Show. I'm your host, Dane McCarthy, broadcasting to you from the bowels of FEMA Region 5, deep in the heart of the Midwest, here in the United States of Amnesia. So today is May 21st, 2015. And I'd like to start off the show with a couple of short videos about the vapor car. Now, what is a vapor car? It is a vehicle, and it's not only cars, but other gasoline engines that have really revolutionized the use of gasoline, because whether you know it or not, an enormous percentage of gasoline that you use in your car is not actually used at all by the car, but simply goes right through the car and out the tailpipe, thus contributing to all kinds of smog, air pollution, billions and hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars in environmental damage, not to mention damage to human beings and animals, and massive deaths. Millions have died. And why is this? I'll talk about this afterwards, but let me first show a couple of short videos that I just pulled off YouTube, and there are many, many more. This is getting an enormous presence on YouTube, just to show that the vapor actually works, that you can run a gasoline engine in a car on vapor. So let's run those two short videos.
2004 Dodge, gonna run on fuel vapors. Fuse is pulled right there. There's the fuse. So what we did, run the hose right into the gas can, put the air inlets. It's gonna suck and bubble the fuel inside and go right into the truck. Go ahead and start it. Okay, it is running. Give it a little gas, not much. So don't. Gas. Alright. I'm going to unplug the fuel, or unplug the hose here, and you'll see it will die out. It's getting no fuel vapors. That is all we have to do, is just figure out a setup in here for an 04 to get it to go, mount it, to go right to the intake.
Okay, that's the first one. Now, that gives you a rough idea of just two guys basically experimenting with the idea of running a car on vapor. And they've done nothing but attach a hose to a gasoline can and run it into the air intake, so it completely bypassing the fuel injection system. So let's run the other one now. It's also short.
Hey guys, it's Craig again. Just to give you guys an update on my 95 Toyota Corolla. I made a couple of modifications to the system that seemed to improve it radically. Found out that I had a number of vacuum leaks. Primarily, my cap had cracked and was leaking around a number of these fittings. So what I did was I re-supported it internally with a piece of hard plastic and then put brass fittings on the internal threads of these to stabilize the lid. I also added some stainless steel wool inside here to prevent a high buildup of bubbles and possibly sucking bubbles or liquid fuel into the intake. This is for another question. This is my flashback arrestor. It is just 3/8 tube by 1/4 inch NPT brass fittings with a brass coupling. It's got stainless steel wool internally. This should help prevent the flash if it does backfire into the intake. Right now I have my vacuum valve adjusted so much that if you can hear it, the engine is running real rough because it's getting so much fuel vapor into the intake that the computer is reading a rich environment and is trying to compensate by cutting back the pulses to the injectors. Yesterday I did a test drive after redoing my lid and fixing vacuum leaks, and used 0.4 0.76 percent of a gallon on a 40-mile trip, which equates to 84 miles to gallon. That seems pretty outrageous, so I'm going to give it some further testing and see if I can verify or replicate those results. I will give you all an update later. Thanks.
Okay, so there are two short examples of pretty simple, primitive systems that actually do work. And people will question whether or not there is a safety issue. Remember, we're talking about maybe a quarter of a gallon of gasoline and maybe a few ounces of gasoline in these systems. And it's not really boiling. All it is air is going through it and helping, in this particular case, helping the vapor. Now, there are plenty of other systems that people use, and some of them are far more sophisticated. And one of the issues that they are using is to actually warm the gasoline. You warm it you don't have to run a tube through the gasoline to make it bubble to get the vapor out. If you keep it warm, then more vapor comes out. And there is an issue, of course, also with getting too much vapor, and so you need to mix air with it, and the faster you go, the more air it requires in order to give the right mixed air versus vapor mixture so that your motor, your engine, will run smoothly. The amazing thing about this is that it has there is a revolutionary context to this, and there's a tremendous threat to the military-industrial complex, to the national security issues that we face in the United States and around the world. There is tremendous implications when you consider what the automobile industry, the oil industry, the environmental issues. The implications are almost mind-boggling. And yet, here you have a very simple system to increase gas mileage. Just consider this. Vapor already is what runs a car. You might say, well, how could that work? They would have done it already. If these systems actually worked, they would have already installed them on cars. Oh, really? Oh, really? No. The exact opposite is the case. The auto industry, the oil industry, has done everything that it can possibly do, including resort to violence, to keep this information suppressed, to not allow you to have the benefits of a very clean running engine that saves gas and saves the environment and saves lives, because they don't care about any of those things. What they care about are profits. And if you have a car that runs on uses only 1 gallon of gas and gets 100 miles per gallon or 200 miles per gallon, then let's say that this system were installed on cars. What would happen to the refineries, to the oil companies? They would not be able to refine gasoline and get enough money for it to make it worth their while to do it. They know this. The only option that they would have would be to, if this system were theoretically in some alternative universe, if this system were actually put in place, the only alternative would be, to make it profitable, would be to raise the price of gas to whatever it took to make gas profitable. In other words, maybe a gallon of gasoline would cost $10 a gallon, or 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 a gallon, whatever it took. That would be in a free and open marketplace in which you did not have the suppression of the government and the multinational corporations. And you might say, well, why would the government be against bringing in really fuel-efficient cars? Because the government and the corporations are essentially the same entity. They're often the same people. You have the revolving door. Many of our elected representatives and the appointed officials in the government, and this is not just the United States, but around the world, these people come from the corporate world, and when they leave office, they will return to the corporate world. Or maybe they were elected out of nowhere, Podunk, Arkansas, like Bill Clinton. And then, of course, when he does his time in office, then he is a celebrity, and he is on the boards of corporations, and is like many ex-presidents and congressmen and senators, governors. All these people have one foot in government serving the people and one foot in industry or the corporate world, global corporatism. They have one foot in that world and they're not serving the people. They're serving their rich investors. And I say rich investors because most investors, large investors, are rich and they're wealthy. They have a very large stake in keeping that stock market high, in keeping those profits high. And when something like the vapor car comes along, and this is not a new idea. What you saw in those two videos were just some ordinary guys without even a lot of technological experience who saw that they might be able to save some gas by changing around the way their vehicle ran. And they showed it and they proved it. And you can very easily, by just simply Googling vapor car, just type in vapor car. And all these videos start popping up. And this goes all the way back to the Pogue carburetor in the early 1930s. A guy named Pogue, P-O-G-U-E, came up with a carburetor that would run a car on fumes. And he got a lot of attention by the media, which were all very excited about it. And there was talk of doing this, but then he was threatened. His life was threatened. They bought up the big car companies and oil companies, got control of his invention, and they just repressed it, destroyed it. There are stories of engineers who work for the big car companies like Ford, Chevrolet, who were tinkering around with vapor carburetors, and they were told, they were threatened. Their research was suppressed. They literally took these little carburetors that got, 100 miles a gallon, and this would be on a big car, like a V8, a heavy V8 from the 1960s or 50s. And they were just destroyed. They were literally destroyed. They were forced, this one guy who took this, he had this new invention, worked for Ford. They literally buried them all. They buried all the information, covered them over to be gone, lost forever. People keep coming up with the same idea, and this is the result. Back in the early 1970s, one of the more famous instances of this repression happened as a result of an invention by a young man, a self-taught car mechanic named Tom Bogley down in El Paso, Texas. And he had a 1970 Ford Galaxy, a big car, a 351 cubic inch motor in that car, and he came up with a design, more sophisticated design, did a lot of research on it. He used a pressurized propane tank as the alternative tank to the main gasoline tank. And it was heated, so it was heated and pressurized. And this gave him a consistent flow of vapor. And he called it the car the Ugly Mobile. And he demonstrated to anyone who was interested that this car could run on fumes alone. And again, this is what a carburetor and a fuel injection system does in a car is inject gasoline into those combustion chambers. But during that 1 or 2 thousandths of a second, before that fuel ignites, when it enters that combustion chamber, it's sprayed in, a small amount of that gasoline is vaporized and is instantly burned. It explodes. And this causes, and the rest of it just goes out into the exhaust. And this is why often a part of what the carbon is, the carbon buildup in the engine as a result of that imperfectly burned gasoline, and it goes into the exhaust, it fills up the exhaust, it goes out the back of the tailpipe. The carbon monoxide is very deadly. I mean, you can kill an animal by holding it in front of the car exhaust for not very long. Or you could kill people. You know, people kill themselves by going into the garage, closing the doors on the garage and turning on the car and just sitting there. And it will kill you. And the people commit suicide that way. There was a guy who was killed, and all his family, just about a month or two ago, a guy on the East Coast, like who lived in Delaware or something, he was a black guy, and it was kind of a cold. He had, I guess, either the electricity was out or something, but he had a generator, and he apparently didn't know this generator would give off carbon monoxide. Killed himself and his whole family by running a gas generator in his house one night while everybody was asleep to generate heat for the house. It was attached to some electrical appliance apparently or something. And this is the kind of fumes that come off imperfectly burned gas. But when you have gasoline fumes, you get a 100% burn rate. And according to, if you can look this up on Google, you can look this up on the internet, what percentage of gasoline is burned in a modern car? And that answer will come up between something like 14 and 30%. At the very top end, 30%. So, in other words, all is actually burned. The rest is not burned. Where does it go? Out into the environment, into people's lungs. So, the video of, for instance, the guy with the gas can, just showing that it could be done. Because you have engineers and things, you have people who are supposed to know better. They should know this, but they don't know this. And they're in a state of denial because they find it incomprehensible that the car companies, the oil companies, the government could be this reprehensible as to keep this information repressed, make it into sound like, oh, it's an urban myth running on fumes. Ha, 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 ha. That could never happen. It could never be done. And yet it's being proved over and over and over, and has been for decades. As long as the internal combustion engine has existed, this possibility has existed. In the case of Tom Ogley, the young man who came up with a very well-running system, he was approached by representatives from the car companies. They wanted to buy his patent. In fact, he did patent his system. You can go and look at his patent. They bought his patent, and he was all ready to go national. He was negotiating. He had investors lined up, people who were behind him, and he was really riding high for a while. He was getting really good money. He was. It changed his life completely from a very poor guy to a very wealthy guy. But then everything started to go bad on him. It went south, it went sour. And what was happening? Things were not working out. More and more it looked to him and to the investors that they were the people who who now owned the patent, were preventing him from developing his system and using it and building garages all over the country that would install these. Because you don't have to build an entire new car to do this. These are add-ons to an existing car. And you don't need necessarily a carburetor or fuel injection. It is so simple that it can be adapted to fit almost any system. But he gradually came to the realization that he was being shut down and the money was drying up. So this had an extremely traumatizing effect on him. And he got into drinking, he got into gambling, and he was found dead or dying out in the country on a road somewhere. And they said he died. They said it was a mixture of alcohol and drugs that killed him. And a lot of people think that he was murdered. And he's not the only one. They got him out of the way, one way or the other, whether it was through slow pressure or through overt action, to eliminate or liquidate the problem. And that would be Tom Ogley, the young man who was naive enough to believe that the major powers that be would allow him to change the world, really. Because this invention is a world-changing, worldwide revolutionary invention. And it must never, never be allowed to see the light of day. I can remember very well when fuel injection came out. When I grew up, there were only carburetors. And there was a lot of talk about how great fuel injection was going to be. Everyone I remember was excited that we're going to get a lot better fuel mileage. It was a great system. And so we started buying the fuel injection cars. And they were no better. There was really no, or almost very little improvement in gas mileage between a carburetor and fuel injection. So they did all this research and they put in this new system and it really didn't do anything. And this is all they could come up with? Really? This is all they had? This is all the developers of cars who have made cars so sophisticated in so many other ways, with computers and, multiple computers now. Cars today are more like something out of a science fiction movie or a science fiction book that I read when I was a kid. And you have everything more and more and more being run by a computer. And yet, the gas mileage isn't that much better. How could that be? How could that be? And the politicians have been saying that we need to become oil independent. So what do? Instead of creating are allowing cars to get on the roads that get 100, 200, 300, 400 miles a gallon. Because remember, Tom Augley had a 1970 Ford Galaxy with a 351 cubic inch engine. This would be a muscle car. And he was getting 100 miles a gallon with his system. And he speculated and said, he guaranteed, he said, look, you know, you get one of these smaller cars, you're with a much smaller engine, a much lighter car. The Galaxy was like something like a 4,000-pound car. These are tanks compared to today's cars, many of today's cars, not like a Humvee or something, a Hummer. But, and this was just a kid who was essentially a garage mechanic, just a low-level guy. Just think what someone could do who had the sophisticated laboratory, the PhD, and could come up with, you know, make it optimal, make the vapor carburetor optimal. And I mean, that is the problem with carburetors and fuel injection, is that they force feed too much gas into the car and force it to ingest or try to burn, and it can't burn it, too much gas. It's way more than it needs. I can remember many years ago, my very first car was a 1958 Chevrolet, really a beater. I think I paid $50 for it. And of course it immediately was having, things weren't working right. I was not a mechanic. I didn't know anything about cars. There was a problem with the car, and so I didn't know if it was getting gas or not. So I decided to take off the air cleaner and take a look at the carburetor, I guess to see if it was flooded or something. And I didn't have a flashlight, so I decided to use a match. And I held that match down at the top of the carburetor, and boom! Bang! Explosion. Singed the eyebrows. And I felt like a real fool for doing that. But that showed me how much energy gas fumes have. That's a very, very clear demonstration of what the explosive power of the gas fumes. Not the gas. The gas itself doesn't burn that well. It's the fumes that burn. And so, you know, here we have a situation in which most people would laugh at this. Most people say, well, that can't be true. It cannot be true. They would not do this. They could not do this. They would not do this. What about the media? Wouldn't the media be up in arms about this? No. No, the media is part of the establishment too, the mainstream media, the state-run media. If a major newscaster would come out with this, it would either be ignored by the other people, or he would be fired. There is too much at stake for them to go to a system that would actually improve the gas mileage on a car dramatically. That's the last thing that they want. So what does this make us have to come to a realization? If you accept that vapor alone can run a car, can you imagine vapor? How much vapor does a gallon of gasoline give off? Quite a bit. And all that is channeled into the combustion chambers mixed with air of a car. And all it does is that combustion chamber and each cylinder is bang, 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 bang. A little explosion, that's all it is. Bang, bang, bang. In a very controlled, very small chamber. And all it does is cause that piston to go up and down, up and down. And it turns the camshaft, the drive chain, gets those wheels turning, and that's it, my friends. That's it. So therefore, don't listen to anyone, I don't care how much college education they have, who says, oh, it's impossible, it couldn't happen. Because in fact, it already is happening. It already is happening. Cars already run on vapor. That is what is exploding and making the car go. So don't believe them. And this is a crime against humanity, is what it really is. Probably the biggest crime that we've seen since the invention of the internal combustion engine. We've seen a lot of damage happen as a result of motorized vehicles from the pollution. Think of the cancers. Think of when lead was being used in gasoline. Lead leading to all kinds of physical problems. Brain, getting into children's brain and lowering their IQ. The ramifications of not allowing a truly efficient use of gasoline in motorized vehicles, the ramifications of that are truly mind-boggling. And these people, you talk about, there should be a Nuremberg trial for those people who have suppressed this information for decades, and they should be imprisoned. These revelations should come out to the people of the world and so that they would be told what is really going on. The people need to know this is probably one of the most important subjects that I've really ever talked about on this show. I mean, radioactivity is really bad. I suppose radioactivity is really the worst, because radioactivity is forever, essentially forever in human terms. And we're seeing, but one of the reasons that perhaps that the push went towards nuclear power instead of just sticking with gasoline is because gasoline didn't seem like a very efficient fuel. Can you imagine a car getting, 8, 10, 12 miles per gallon? You think, that's a gallon of gas. That's a lot of fuel right there to only go that far. But maybe it's not because of the inability of gasoline to provide enough BTUs of energy. Maybe it's not the gas's fault, but it's the operator's fault. It's the ignorance of the people of not demanding that the full potential of gasoline would be used. People talk about using hydrogen. These things have gone almost nowhere. And they're used, tremendous change in the infrastructure is required. People are coming up with all kinds of other things, like I've seen the compressed air cars in France. Very, very lightweight aluminum little things like smart cars, even lighter than smart cars, running on compressed air. And we're told, hey, America has to become energy independent. So what do? They frack for oil, or they go into the tar sands of Canada and completely ripping up the environment, the pristine. They want to go into the oceans more and look for more oil. They want to use up all the oil to make gasoline and to use, to make their products when they don't need to do it. They really don't need to. In fact, you might say, well, you need oil to make all these different products. No, you don't. There are other ways to make, for instance, plastics. You don't need fossil oil to make plastic. There are other methods that you can use, polymers that come from natural sources to make oil. So, and here we have this rivalry between the major powers on the planet. And what is it a lot of it about? It is getting control of those oil fields in Saudi Arabia, in Iraq, in Iran. Who's going to get them? Is it going to be Russia? Is it going to be the United States? How does China figure in on this? China is like the forgotten power player, or no one's willing to confront China. Why? Because China is making the products that Americans use now, most of them. And so, well, they need oil. They need to make those products. They need to make clothes. They need to make gadgets. They need to make parts of every imaginable part nowadays that you can think of. They're almost all made in China. They have built up this enormous system, incredibly polluting, environmentally damaging. It's really bad for your health to live in Beijing, in China. I have a friend who's in Beijing right now, and he talks about how easy it is to see the pollution, the haze. It's really bad. You can see it. You can smell it. You can hear. You can taste it when you go outside. But none of this would be necessary. None of this. So our leaders say, well, we have climate change, and we are responsible for changing the climate of the planet. And like it never changed before. Oh, it never changed. In all of history, in the entire planet, the climate never changed until now. And only humans did. And humans are responsible. And so therefore, we have to find out ways to use fewer of our natural resources. And what does that mean, my friends? It means you're going to have to live in a more primitive lifestyle. You're not going to be able to drive a car. We would prefer that you drive a bike. Or you get a smaller car, or you get an electric car. But you have to do something, or else you are destroying the planet. And it's your fault. And you've got to stop buying these products that are made in China. And maybe you should stop traveling. And also, we need to raise your taxes a lot to pay for all this carbon that you're wasting and you're using. And that way, we can offset your use of carbon, your carbon footprint, your enormous carbon footprint, by taking those taxes and putting them into, well, let's say a program like geoengineering. We'll dump iron filings into the ocean and cause algae blooms. And algae is what? That's a plant, right? Algae, what does a plant do? A plant creates oxygen. And it takes in carbon dioxide. It loves carbon dioxide. And carbon dioxide is the issue. There is too much carbon dioxide. We need to get rid of the carbon dioxide, much of the carbon dioxide. It is dangerous to human health. Yes, the EPA has declared carbon dioxide is dangerous to human health. It's a toxic gas. Of course, we breathe out carbon dioxide. We breathe in oxygen and breathe out carbon dioxide. Not carbon monoxide, but carbon dioxide. Totally different. Plants are the opposite. Plants breathe in carbon dioxide and breathe out oxygen. So they create oxygen. They love carbon dioxide. So a carbon dioxide rich environment actually encourages plant growth. But the people who believe that human beings are changing the planet's climate won't tell you that. That's one thing you never hear. That plant growth is encouraged. In other words, they say high carbon dioxide levels cause desertification. What is desertification? Desertification is when you don't have enough plant life to hold the soil in place, and it blows all around and becomes a desert. Well, it's true that plants need water, and they also need carbon dioxide. They also need sunlight. So those are the three things. There are certain nutrients that plants need, just like human beings. But the strange thing is that in the 70s and the 60s, when scientists were saying that global cooling was the issue, not global warming, you notice they won't say global warming now, because they know that the planet really is not warming. So therefore, let's not call it global warming anymore. Let's just call it climate change. That makes it safe. So actually, they can say, well, the planet is sort of like, well, it's neither warming nor cooling, but it is changing in a sort of vague way. But back in the 70s, there was a lot of scientists. I mean, this was the government line. There were books written about this. There were documentaries made about this. There were articles. There were lectures. There were newspaper reports that the world is getting cooler as a result of people. And what did they say? They said that global cooling causes desertification. Well, so which is it, friends? Is it global cooling that causes desertification or global warming? And what percentage of climate change is caused by humans? Well, I was told by a close colleague of James Hansen, when I asked that question, that it was 2/3. 2/3 of climate change is caused by humans. And I told him, I said, but that's more than the sun. Are you telling me that humans have a greater effect on the climate than the sun? He said it's because of the number of humans, the large population of humans. Too many humans, too many people. And I just gave up. I didn't respond. I don't think I responded to that. I just sort of sat back and it's like, I left the lecture early. I left a few minutes after that. But when I asked my question, it was just like somebody slapped him in the face. Somebody punched him. He just wasn't ready for that. He wasn't ready for someone to ask him what percentage of climate change was caused by humans. Now, the actual number that climatologists will, if you look it up, is somewhere between 3 and 5%. That's what those people who believe in human-caused climate change will tell you. Those who are the horrible climate deniers, like Holocaust deniers, they're evil criminals and terrorists who don't believe that humans cause climate change. They say that humans have little to no effect, and many of them say they virtually have virtual no effect. Humans have virtually no effect on the climate as a whole. When you consider that the sun is in control, humans are not in control. The sun is in control. The sun is the cause of everything, the primary cause of everything that goes on planet Earth, essentially. That the energy from the sun created life because it activates, the energy activates. And whether or not there's a soul in humans, that is another question, which is a metaphysical question. And I do think there is a soul in humans, which is non-physical, but even before the sun, there's the primary driver of the universe, and that would be the divine. But for practical purposes, for scientific purposes, you can say that the sun is the driver of climate. And the reason I say this is because those people who most accurately predict climate change on planet Earth, where do they look? They look at the sun, not at cars, not at industry, not at cows. Some people think that cows, that animal husbandry actually causes the most amount of climate change. Why? Because essentially farting, cow farts. The gas that's released by these thousands of cows and pigs has a negative effect. It goes up into the stratosphere and hangs out there for a couple of months and then it dissipates. But my son believes that. He believes that it's really, he's a vegan. He thinks it's cows and pigs that are causing the problem. And it's humans, but they're the ones that are, and people need to become vegans and therefore get rid of all these animals, and then it would be okay, it would be better. But those scientists who most accurately predict long-term climate change, and meteorologists just laugh at climatologists because meteorologists know that it's very difficult to predict the weather even a month or two worldwide, much less a year, 5-year, 10-year, 50 years, 20 years, 75 years, 100 years into the future. And only the climatologists claim, they said, well, we have these computers. The computers predict that we're going to, this is way back in the 90s they were doing this with computers, predicting a 5-foot rise in sea level by 2010. And how much, rise in sea level, but they keep pushing it back, see. Well, actually it's not 2010. We meant not 2010, but 2020. And now here we're at 2015. Still no appreciable rise in sea level. They say, well, but aren't the polar ice caps melting? Well, if they're melting, where's the water going? Well, the reality is, of course, that the North Pole, there is no land under the North Pole, it's sea ice. And so even if the entire North Pole melted, guess how much the ocean level would rise? 0, because it's sea ice, and it displaces all the water the ice sinks as it grows in thickness and displaces the water. So there would be, even if the entire North Pole completely vanished, there would be no rise in sea level. The South Pole, that is on land, so there, if it completely vanished, yes, the sea level would rise. And we would have to deal with that. But guess what? They're not melting. And we are regularly told by the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, that it's just around the corner, folks. It's doom and gloom. It's death and destruction. The end of our civilization as we know it. And it's all because of you. Because of you driving so many cars, so you've got to stop taking those Sunday drives because you're destroying the planet. And of course, it has nothing to do with the actual carburation system or the fuel injection that's wasting gas, and most of it's going out the tailpipe. It has nothing to do with that. Just ignore that. Just ignore all these dumb hillbillies who are coming up with gas cans and running fuel vapor directly into their intake manifold on their vehicles and running their pickup trucks on vapors. Ignore that. That's stupid. That's not true. And nothing that's on the internet you can believe anyway. So, just believe us. We're scientists. We're the government. We're automakers. We're oil companies. We love you. We think you're great. We're trying our best. And we can't, but with all our millions and billions of dollars that we have, we just cannot come up with a better system. I'm sorry. Except for electric. And that will help you get, maybe instead of 35 miles a gallon, you'll get 45 miles a gallon if you go electric, or 50. I mean, maybe you go with a Tesla. Why don't you buy a Tesla? You want an electric car? Just buy a Tesla. How much is a Tesla? Like $30,000, $40,000? And it's this tiny little car, not much bigger than this desk. I've seen them before, a little tiny sports car. And so it's like, well, just shut up. Shut up, or we'll kill you. We might have to kill you. Tom Ogle and Pogue and all these other guys. So they don't care if you're a little guy and just do it yourself. But if these guys tried to patent these devices that they're coming up with, which are all essentially the same thing, what is the first thing that happens? Patent infringement. Because the car companies, the oil companies, own all these different patents for all these different ways of making a vapor car. And all they do is, if a person actually gets serious about going commercial with this, then they just, you get a letter from their lawyer saying, we believe you are infringing on our patent that we have for this device, and this is how you're infringing this, and cease and desist. What are you going to do? So they've got it sewed up. They think that, that people are too stupid to believe that there might be another alternative than their way of doing things. But unfortunately, the reality is completely different. Completely different. So they don't really care. They believe that maybe it's a good thing that this chaos is happening. That people are miserable, that people are sick, that people are fighting with each other, people are frustrated, people are angry, people are afraid. They like that. And they're not going to do anything to make their lives more prosperous, more fulfilling, more satisfying, more happy. They're jealous. They're like the Grinch. These rich people is what they are. They like to ruin stuff. You know, they love to ruin Christmas for people. They love to settle, to put, you know, something really bad just before Christmas. That they get off on that. They laugh about it. They think it's funny that people, and they always, I think they vie with each other to see how weird they can be. Let's see if they'll believe this. This is the most outrageous lie we could ever think of. And let's just see if they buy it. And then they get some handsome guy on TV saying that, you know, and well, you know, this is the way it is. And people go, really? Wow. I mean, they wouldn't lie. It's got to be true. They wouldn't lie to us about something like that, would they? Or would they? So that's all there is for today. You have a great weekend and sleep well, folks.